Stop,
demonstration
stop,
or
stop,
on.
stop. Dwight, hold on. We're up. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you here on the largest progressive talk radio station in this part of the nation. And I want you to meet the Morning Stars, the Santita Jackson Morning Stars. I will be with you today for a little while, everybody. That's right. That's right. I want you to like and subscribe on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, and then click the bell so that whenever we come on live, you will be able to hear us and find out what's going on. You'll be able to see us. And then, of course, go to the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page there. And I also share it with Reverend Jackson's page as well, Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. And I want you to share it with your friends. We were talking about the Dexter Reed case in the previous hour. Young black man, 26 years of age. He was driving through his neighborhood. He had tinted windows in his car. And the police said they were pulling him over because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He was shot at 96 times in 41 seconds. Of course, he is dead. And the police have a 30-day paid suspension. Will they get back to work? Yes. Will they be paid? Yes. We're going to follow that case. And I know it means something incredibly it's incredibly meaningful to you. It resonates with you in Minneapolis because of George Floyd. We still do not have the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Think about that, everybody. And police killings of civilians in the United States have gone up since the George Floyd killing. But let's talk about what's happening with our students. We're living through just a moment of tremendous change. Tremendous change. Some of the most prominent, the universities all across the country, maybe we're looking at Columbia because it's one of the Ivies, but the fact is at UT Austin, UCLA, the students just walked out today. It was a massive walkout. It just happened. So by the time you hear me in the morning, this morning, we will see where that has gone. At USC, they've canceled the graduation. Now they also canceled the valedictorian, who's a Muslim American woman, and maybe they canceled the graduation so that she would not speak. They already were going to disallow that. There's a lot going on, but what's going on right now is that they have asks. See, we think they're just sitting in the encampments. Josh Feinstein of Jewish Voice for Peace Action Michigan, Dwight McKee, Senior Advisor to Cornell West and the Dean of the Mount Alpha Redemption Project, and of course, National Youth Director of Rainbow Push, Minister Cameron Barnes. We think that they're just sitting in the encampments and they want a ceasefire. No, they have a list of asks, chief among them, BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. They want Columbia and all of these universities to divest from Israel and Israel-affiliated companies, much as we did in the 1980s with South Africa. That's exactly what we did. And by the time I got to college in the 80s, it had become a thing. If you looked on the bottom of a product, you wanted to see where it was made. If it was made in South Africa, you didn't touch it. If companies made their money in South Africa, you wouldn't touch them. I remember, I'm a big tennis fan. Loved Arthur Ashe, had a little crush on him and all of that, but he was also a great tennis player who paved the way for Yannick Noah and the Williams sisters and Coco Gauff and so many of these people we have seen down through the years. He did that. And of course, Althea Gibson paved the way for him. Well, as an activist, which is what Arthur Ashe was, UCLA man himself, he said, okay, he went to South Africa, saw it, and said, we can't come here and play. And of course, South Africa being this wealthy nation, Josh, people would go and have exhibition matches in South Africa. They had no major tournaments there, but they did have exhibition matches where these individual players made a lot of money to play one match. So the two top players in the late 70s and early 80s, you would remember this, Bjorn Borg and John McEnroe. I loved them both and loved watching them play.
I like Bjork more because even though McEnroe made all this noise, Bjork was very stoic and just like, he's very polite.
Absolutely.
I
had a crush on him. I had a crush on him too. I mean, come on, these were my guys. I love them. But he was stoic. But it turns out he was very fiery before that. But he had to learn how to discipline himself, and so the fire came out on the court, and he became one of the greatest players we've ever seen. He had a very short career, but it was so impactful.
Incredibly so.
Well, when they were offered the opportunity to do an exhibition match, Arthur Ashe went to them both and he said, "Hey, don't go there. Don't do this match because you'll have to play before a segregated audience if they let blacks in at all. And let me tell you what's happening. Let me tell you about Soweto. Let me tell you about Steve Biko. Let me tell you about Nelson and Winnie Mandela and the ANC and Walter Sisulu and da. When he made that case to them both, even though I understand now that Bjorn Borg personally didn't want to go, his management team said later for that, it's a lot of money. John McEnroe made the decision and publicly stated that he was not going, and he told you why.
Wow.
That was in 1980. That was a big deal.
Wow.
He had me for life. But by the time we got to 83 and 84, and Reverend Jackson had made that part of his campaign platform, we started getting arrested at the South African embassy.
Wow.
And you dare not at that time buy anything from South Africa. But as we talked about having that same kind of movement with Israel, you've gotten tremendous pushback. But now that's changing.
Yes.
With these college students. And today, Josh, Columbia announced that they absolutely will not be pulling their investments from Israel. So what do you make of that? They unequivocally, they said no. And then at the same time, they announced that they will have these people arrested. And they will also have them, they will be suspended from school. And remember, the NYPD came on that campus, Dwight McKee and Cameron Barnes, and took the photographs of their IDs so they know who they are. So I gave you all of that in the way of giving you some background about BDS and just the cultural shifts that have happened. But what do you make of what's happening with Columbia as we're watching them escalate right now? And now we're watching the students all over the country. More and more schools are joining in.
Oof. Dwight, do you want to go first? Because there's a lot there, and I'm just it's a lot to digest. Or Cameron.
Okay, Cameron. What your thoughts?
There's a lot there.
Because he just came out of college just a few years ago.
Yeah.
And so you're very connected. This is your generation.
Mm-hmm. I want to specifically talk about a little bit about this response to what's going on at Columbia and how it is, of course, reminiscent of the same kind of encampments and the same kind of protests that students held in 1968 or around the Vietnam War. It's not something that is new. Students have always been very, very involved in activism and in the movement. Much of which we know in the civil rights movement was started by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, better known as SNCC. That's where you got some of our most prominent leaders from, the late Congressman John Lewis, who was known as the Conscience of the Congress, got his start as a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee member. So students have been on the front lines of this for a long time, particularly for this situation. Not only there in Columbia, very close to home, as Ms. Jackson, you know, even here in Northwestern University, there is a lot of a demonstration being had. And as you've mentioned, let me say again, it is not just us to be out here, us as in these young people and these students. I keep calling myself a student. I'm not in school anymore, but with these young people, they are not just demonstrating for the sake of doing so. I want to talk a little bit about some of the asks that they have had in doing so. First of all, even with what's going on in Northwestern, there are more than 1,500 people who have signed the petition online that supports this demonstration, and what they're asserting is that American academic institutions have become hostile spaces for anti-war, anti-apartheid, and pro-Palestinian speech. Young people are likening this to what is apartheid. I was not a part of the South African apartheid. I've heard so much about it being at Rainbow Push for the last 10 years. I've heard about Nelson Mandela and the importance of this. Now we are living in our own. We don't have to hear about this now. We're living in our own. And we have an appropriate response when you talk about the BDS movement, which, by the way, is not brand new, has been here for years, has been here for decades, but now has a fresh face in front of it. And when you talk about boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning on Israel, what they're talking about is, and let me just actually say, and I wrote it down because I want people to understand, the BDS movement, it attempts to use economic and cultural boycotts against Israel, financial divestment from the state, and government sanctions to pressure Israel's government to abide by the international law and end its controversial policies toward Palestinians. Policies now described by some, as I mentioned, as apartheid. So these are young people that are responding just as history has allowed us to before. We're now fighting the fight of today. It wasn't South Africa this time. It was South Africa yesteryear. It's Palestinians today. And who knows who will be there tomorrow.
So, I mean, Dwight McKee, what do you make of what's happening now? Have you seen this before?
Oh, yeah, of course, I've seen it before. I saw it in the 60s with Vietnam. I saw it in the 50s and the 60s with his Cameron said with Snake and the civil rights movement. I've seen it all of most of my adult life. This is a little different though, in that this is a little broader, a little more, a little broader in its scope, a little broader in its coalitions, but also the resistance is a little broader than it was before. Before, you could just about divide the resistance again between the left and the right. The right was pretty much pro-war. The left was pretty much against the war. The right was pretty much against civil rights. The left was pretty much for civil rights. In this situation, because of the nature of the struggle, the resistance is a combination of a lot of the leftist Zionists and the very conservative Christians. They have kind of a coalition, an implicit coalition, where both of them are very, very pro-Zionist, but also the protesters are a combination of pro-Arab and Arab Muslim students and progressive Jewish students are kind of on the forefront of this. So it's kind of a different phenomenon than it was in the 60s and the 70s. The other difference in this is you really are seeing the power of APEC and how it functions throughout all facets of American life, from media to the military, to the politicians, to the to education. They really exercise a level of power that nobody in South Africa exercised, or for us, none of the Southern institutions exercised. They were racist, but they were not as organized. And these, in this struggle, APEC is more organized than I've ever seen any functional institution in America, in that they, in a single call, can get presidents fired, get politicians riled up, get media directed. They exercise an immense amount of power. And so what they've effectively done is they've turned this anti-Zionist sentiment and this pro Gaza, let the people live sentiment into a Hamas movement and a anti-Semitic movement. They very effectively have done that. And so if you believe in trying to stop the genocide, they immediately label you as either pro-Hamas or anti-Semitic. And it, in many ways, it neutralizes, almost neutralizes a lot of the momentum that the moral imperative of stopping the genocide has, because they somehow make you the bad guy if you believe in not killing the people. So it's a lot like the 50s, a lot like the 60s, but in many ways different than. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it all plays at the Democratic Convention.
So I have a rebuttal for Dwight, but then I have a question. First, Dwight, I agree with everything that you've said up in your point about how the Zionist and AIPAC operates, that anything you do that's pro-humanitarian, pro-Palestinian, immediately it's anti-Semitic. And in the past, for decades, that's been a very successful narrative. And I would say through October, it was a very successful narrative. But what you've seen take hold of the past 4 or 5 months, again, is people are now waking up and saying, it's not just progressive Jews that are saying, no, anti-Semitism is different from being against Zionism, that there's a humanitarian issue. I think, and they wouldn't admit it, I think AIPAC and the Zionists are a little bit in panic mode, because the rule book that they've followed for so long and been so successful with for decades and decades, which they turned to in October, which was like, immediately they had people fired, people canceled. When they said, well, I'm against the genocide, immediately they're out. That's not happening anymore. What's happening is, as people are saying, people are making the encampment. Students are they're getting arrested. They're still sticking to their guns. You have people from all walks of life standing up and saying, if they're Jewish, not in my name. And if they're not Jewish, they're saying, hey, it's not anti-Semitic to say that Israel is committing a genocide. So I think AIPAC is actually probably, one thing I'd say is, having followed them, they're very smart, they're very well funded, they're good at strategy. But I think in back rooms right now, they're figuring out what's the pivot move. They've had this path for so long. But Dwight, I think that path is being interrupted. Now, here I come to my question, Dwight, was when Zunis was on yesterday on the Santita Jackson show, Zunis was on, and he talked about how in years ago, he had done a protest. They put it from shanty towns to protest apartheid. And the university, although they were unhappy, let the shanty towns stand. And so they were never taken. He said, conversely, right now, the way the universities are moving in with such vigor and such venom to actually destroy the students, he said it's a whole nother level. When I hear you talking, I know you've been there. I respect Zunis a lot. My spider sense was telling me that it probably still is similar to what happened in the 60s. The level of vitriol was the same, was just enacted differently. Can you help educate me a bit on that? Because I wasn't there, and I'm trying to understand then versus now. You know,
it's a good question, Zach, Josh. And I was saying if they still use that as the pretext to move on. Yeah, I'm not saying that it's as successful as it once was. I'm saying it's really, really use it as a pretext that anybody who speaks out against the genocide, they try to label as anti-Semitic.
Yes.
Even the young Jews who speak out, they try to say is anti-Semitic.
Even not so young Jews.
And the not so young Jews.
Young at heart. Come on. That's the best part.
I think that the difference in this is, one is this the 60s protests were essentially led by Black students and white liberals. Many of the priests got involved. Many of the northern Jews got involved. But the essential face there was with the black students coming out of SNCC, coming out of black colleges, coming out of Tennessee State. In the Vietnam fight, the face of that fight was basically middle class white students who they themselves were in jeopardy of going to the war. They were being constricted. Many of them was going to Canada. They were operating more in their own self-interest. They didn't want to go to war. They didn't want to get shot. They didn't want to get killed. They were really fighting the fight. A lot of the fight was about themselves and where they fitted in that. In the South African fight, that fight was really a more vicarious fight. In the South African fight, a lot of people didn't go to jail. The face of that fight was, young, progressive, at some levels, some of the more progressive churches. That was much more an identifiable moral fight because the racism was so egregious. It was an apartheid state. It was split based on racism. And so it was not hard to take a moral position on that. So when they said, what's the word, Johannesburg, it's a very hip thing to go in that direction because you didn't have to pay. There was no real price to be paid, in those fights. This fight is a little different in that there is an emotional connection on both sides that it's real life and death in front of your face. And so those who are protesting the genocide are protesting the genocide because they see babies and mothers and daughters killed in front of their eyes every day. And so it's life and death on that side. But on the Zionist side, their argument is that we are also under assault. They're also trying to kill us. And if we don't fight, if we don't bomb, if we don't resist, then our lives are at stake. And so both sides see it as a matter of life and death. They see it as a moral imperative beyond just resistance. They really see it as life for the Palestinians or death for the Palestinians. And those on the Zionist side see it as life and death for them. And it raises the stakes on both sides. And I think it also raises the intensity on both sides. And so what you will not see, I think, on the student side this time around is I don't think you'll see any real compromise. Before they could kind of threaten you with graduation. You won't graduate, you'll get expelled. You won't, be able to get back into a good college. That had more force in the earlier protests than it does this time around, because the students this time around, I think, are going to say, we don't care if we get expelled. We're not leaving, unless you all meet our demands to disinvest in these ventures. We're going to be here until you arrest us. Before, and then I'll turn it over to Cameron. But when they would say, we could say boycott Coca-Cola, we ain't going to drink Coca-Cola if they invested in South Africa. We ain't going to buy diamond rings if they invested in South Africa. That was much more, risque than you're invested in building bombs and dropping the bombs on people in South Africa. And if you don't divest your interest in these bomb factories and these, chemical factories that are killing people, if you don't divest that, then we are not going to leave here, because for them it's life and death. And the schools are saying, well, the same donors that give us our money are the ones who got the money that's invested in these companies, and they're not going to let us divest. And so I think it's going to reach much more of a climax this time around because the stakes are so high.
Well, if I can add this was also, as you come in, Cameron and Josh, as Dwight said, the lines were different. Israel is one of our chief allies. The ANC was an enemy of state. Remember Mandela as president of South Africa, who we helped to imprison, along our CIA and the MI6, helped to put him in jail and kept him there 27 and a half years. He was a terrorist. He was on the terrorist list while he was sitting at the White House as the head of state. Not Netanyahu. We're funding Netanyahu. And while we were allied, and we were allied with the South African apartheid regime, as we're allied with this one, but it's different. Now you're talking about nuclear secrets, business ties, a beachhead in one of the most resource-rich regions of the world. It is same players, but as I think, Dwight, you make the brilliant point, and you ask the brilliant question, Josh, what's at stake here? And you're also watching, as I'm watching, Cameron, as you come in, these young people, it's interesting, the people that I've been meeting in this process and watching the young Jewish activists who connect me to the Palestinian activists, who connect me to different Black activists. They're all, offline, working together. And they also are not telling you when they're going to pop up 1,000 strong at Grand Central Station and on the bridges. And they're doing this together. What's not being projected in corporate media is you see a lot of frightened Jewish students at Columbia, and my heart goes out to them, because to live in fear is a horrible thing. When I was driving through Selma, Alabama, and we were sitting at a car full of an SUV full of us. We saw a Confederate flag on someone's lawn, and we sped up. We said, we got to get out of here. This is a hostile place.
If I may, Santita, for decades, I know seeing the Israeli flag, and for me, seeing the Israeli flag was not something I would think about because I was fed on a diet of Israelism, right? Yeah. But seeing the Israeli flag when you're Palestinian or even from Levant does strike fear. That actually strikes fear. So I want to. The thing is, when you said your heart goes out to the students who are afraid, there's so many levels to that. The first one is because you are slightly uncomfortable doesn't mean that you should submit to having a genocide happen because you're slightly uncomfortable with ideas. That's, and when I hear about the idea that people are afraid to put mezuzahs on their door, just because you're two things. If you're afraid to put a mezuzah on your door, that's what we Jews do. It's that's on you. That's on you. As a Jew, I am not particularly afraid about anti-Semitism. It doesn't, because my conscience is clear. And I have been confronted with real anti-Semitism from time to time. And when I am, I address it. And that's that. But the idea is, for years, the students there are being told it's not safe here, it's not safe there. I don't know what's going on in Columbia, but I can tell you that the UMich campus, it's a very peaceful environment. There's a lot of people there, and the majority are saying they're pro-Palestinian. And there are some Israelis that come and they have their flag, they put it their flag. And one thing that happens is they make a point about there's no engagement. Do not engage. no engagement. And anyone, the one or two times when someone has even gone to even engage, this, I'm talking about just to discuss with the people with the Israeli flag, people from the Palestinian movement, from the ceasefire movement will come over and have that person say, move away from them. They have a right to be here. I guess my point is that I don't know what's going on in Colombia, but the narrative of fear for the students who are Zionists, I think that they're slightly uncomfortable because they're faced with the truth. But being uncomfortable faced with the truth is different. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm saying I agree, because a lot of this is really, as I hear people at Columbia talking, I hear what's happening at Northwestern. I hear what you're saying about University of Michigan. These people are not anti-Jewish. First of all, these Arab students are Semitic too, so let's be clear on that. But they're not anti-Jewish.
Yes.
And this fight is not a religious fight; it's a political one. This is about land and resources. So let's stop with that right now.
Yep.
Because people have get married, have children all across these lines. Nobody cares about that. This is about resources. All these fights are political.
Yeah.
So when I see these kids on here, I mean, there is a viral video that I sent to you that was on Instagram, where there is a young Jewish woman standing in the middle of the encampment. No one is near her. She's telling the police in this worried voice, "They're hurting me. Oh my God, they're harassing me." And people are just looking at her. And a lot of that is going on in New York too.
Yeah. There's a good meme of that, by the way. The woman's like, I'm here. They're so threatening. Ma'am, is there anything threatening you? No, but they're threatening. And you have to be here because I have my nail appointment at 5.
Oh, stop. But I don't want to dismiss people.
Sorry. All right.
No, you're right. And having said that,
Yeah.
I don't want to be dismissive.
Okay.
Whenever anyone says anything, I listen. Now, if it's disproved, Cameron, John, Dwight, okay, I can live with that too. But if you tell me you're afraid, I want to sit down and talk to you. I want to hear. I'm not going to just dismiss you and say, it's in your mind. No, I'm not going to do that because I don't want you to do that to me. I don't want to do that. But I'm hearing you because you've been to the encampment and you're like, hey, guys, that's not happening. At Columbia, they're saying, y'all, that's not happening. At Northwestern, at USC, at UCLA, UT Austin, the black colleges, that ain't happening. But that, and Dwight with his substantial civil rights experience, which is superior to mine because he's older, we knew when people were saying that they were sabotaging. Because you have saboteurs, right, Dwight? I mean, you have them walking in trying to break things up. But Cameron, what are you hearing?
I was just sitting here taking a few of these notes because
it's a lot to take in.
It's a lot to take in and so much to even unpack. I want to even first speak about Brother Dwight McKee's very, very interesting interpretation of looking at this from the perspective of those that are Zionists feeling that it's a matter of life and death, and those that are Palestinians feeling that it's life and death. And so, as he mentioned, then the stakes become higher. Both of them feel as if they are fighting, of course, for life and death. That's what's going on over there. Now, the response that students are engaging in over here, as we have mentioned, we are not saying, again, I'm saying we as in the students that are protesting, we are not saying that we are anti-Semitic by any means, because as you look across Northwestern and UCLA and Columbia, there are Jewish students that are participating in these encampments and in these protests.
So they're leading.
And even leading, organizing, planning, because they understand, as Josh though mentioned, that I am not saying that I'm going against it, but it's hard to confront reality and you become uncomfortable with it. I'm uncomfortable with the fact that, if speaking as a Jewish American student, I am uncomfortable with the fact that my homeland is participating in a said genocide. What young people are saying across this country is that Palestinian victims of war is one of the most brutal war crimes in modern American history. This is what we're facing right now. And so when you talk about how the students are responding to what is looked at again as the personification of the apartheid that we heard about, we didn't know about. Now we're living in our own excerpt of the same kind of story. It's very interesting the way they are then and we are responding to do so. Because here's the thing, what all they're saying is, as mentioned, they're demanding that they're disclosing where the schools are disclosing where the investment is going to. That's where this BDS movement is coming from. Because what they're saying is we don't know what our tuition money is funding. We don't want our money to go back from our university to fund then a genocide and apartheid and what is known as, or what is becoming known as, one of the most brutal war crimes in American modern history. So students are responding in a very intricate and a very meticulous way. This is not thrown together. This is not spur of the moment. It's very tactical in the sense that we're being very careful about how we go about doing this. And the responses from these organizations, these institutions, these colleges, I think is worthy to be looked at, because it's the response by saying, well, we don't want to call the police, but you're disrupting campus life. You're going against the policies. Northwestern actually put in, I wrote it down, they just created an addendum to balance the right to peacefully demonstrate with the goal to protect the community. And any violation of those rules contained in this addendum is going to lead to disciplinary action such as a suspension or expulsion and possible criminal sanction. The response from these universities, from students that are just asking for the transparency of, are we funding a genocide? What is our stance on a genocide? What are we doing to invest, so to speak, or to empower those that are over there participating in this? How is our money being spent like that? We're going to protest. And the students are saying, we're going to be out here until we get that answer. The response from them, the university, is, we're going to possibly give you criminal sanctions. We're going to suspend you. We're going to expel you, because the freedom of speech, apparently, that we were that was highlighted in the First Amendment is apparently not as free as it says to be, because now we're being punished for doing so. And again, these are Jews, these are Palestinians, these are African Americans, these are even Caucasian Americans that just care about the sanctity of life, if you will. And they're being punished for doing so, when all students are saying is, we just want to know, are we contributing to killing babies? Are we contributing to bombing schools, to bombing hospitals? And if we are, we're not going to stand for that. And we want our university to hear our voice. And in hearing that voice, you have students that have to cover their faces now, because they do not want to be identified on the campuses, because they're wreaking havoc all across the country. Because the retaliation, students that cannot even speak to the media and don't want to be identified because they fear retaliation, not only something like an expulsion, but being verbally and physically accosted on the street of their camp, of their university. Some students cannot even go back to class because people have demonized them for standing up for this right and made them out to be some kind of public enemy and made them out to be a target. This is the response that's going on to student activism right now.
Wow.
I mean, Dwight and Josh, they're being threatened, and well, they're being told. The donors are asking for the list of the demonstrators, of the protesters, so that they cannot be hired.
Yes.
So they cannot get jobs. Did this happen with Vietnam, Dwight?
No.
So when you
No.
say that the nature of this has changed, is that what you're talking about too?
Yeah. No, this is a different fight.
Well, when you say it's a different fight, what is the fight?
The ultimate fight is for world domination. That's the ultimate fight. Is, as you said before, Israel is America's most important ally and a part of the world that is most right now important to America. And because it's the basis of its oil, basis of a lot of its natural resources. Israel helps keep in check those Arab nations that without Israel would be less inclined to deal with America and more inclined to deal with Russia and deal with China.
Mhm.
And so, strategically, Israel is essential for America to maintain its preeminence as the world dominant superpower. Now, how that's playing out is very interesting because it looks like in the next couple of days, the world court is going to find Netanyahu as a war criminal who, because of America's strategic interests, is taking complete advantage of America to wage his own war of genocide because he knows that it's going to be very difficult for America to remain neutral and keep its position as the world dominant superpower. So when it comes down, at the local level, you're talking about those interests who benefit from America being the world dominant superpower, being able to maintain their positions. And so they're the ones who are invested in these schools and invested into the military industrial complex, invested, that benefits out of a military budget. And so because they have so much at stake, they're the ones that's playing hardball and forcing universities to play hardball. They didn't have that at stake in South Africa. They didn't have that at stake
In
during
Vietnam.
the civil rights movement. Yeah, they didn't have that at stake in Vietnam. But now, they got a lot of skin in the game. And so because they got so much skin in the game, they're the ones that are putting the pressure on the university to bear down on these protesters. The other part of it is because this election is going to be dependent upon how these protests play out. And they got so much invested in Biden and the Democratic, machine that supports this military industrial complex, that in order to make sure that he stays viable, they have to make sure that protest is minimized. And so for them, their stakes are so high that they put undue pressure on these institutions and the media and the military or the police departments to bear down on these protesters so it just don't get out of hand.
Josh, how do you see this playing out electorally? I mean, because to that point, because I'm also wondering, this is just all interesting because President Biden's approval rating on his handling of this particular issue, not the schools, but Israel, Palestinians, it's not even at 30%. And yet they say he's surging in the polls. I'm like, with whom? Cameron, wait. Before I go to you, Josh, you're not hearing that in these streets. Is that what you're telling me?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I have folks, young people, activists, civil rights, voting rights activists who have never sat out an election, who contemplate the task of going to the poll and not voting at all. And that, to me, lets us know how heinous this situation is, because anytime you have those that are voting rights activists, we really know what the vote is. And I'm doing my best to let folks understand that. Now, I can understand how upset you are, but that's never the answer to not vote. Let me say that publicly. That is never the answer. But the fact that there is that consideration on behalf of the performance by this administration gives us some kind of signal.
And then there's Trump. He's
Exactly.
he's gaining traction, not gaining. His support with Black people, particularly Black men, is growing, Josh.
Soaring.
Excuse me, soaring. Okay. Well,
So-
there's that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not something I'm espousing. What we're trying to let people know is that is happening. And the Democrats get angry with you when you say it. Oh, you're a Trumper. I'm like, no, I'm a truther. And not the way you think. I'm just trying to let you know what's up. Because I know too many people who were, however they came to Biden in 2020, they got there. Too many people are saying to me, this whole thing, this has been a real game changer, Josh.
You're so right. And again, so many people, and potentially myself included, who are all in for Biden or Biden, can't see themselves voting for Biden this time around. And I think Cameron's actually correct in the idea that Trump's popularity is soaring. Biden is doing everything he can to help Trump win this election. Biden is going out of his way. Well, I'm being cute about it, but
yeah.
I think the bottom line is when it comes to results, regardless of what. Again, I feel about Trump. I've always been a Biden person, but he's the man, and Biden's the man in charge that's enabling a genocide. That is a failure of leadership. That's a failure of humanity. And I think the one thing I just want to impress upon your listeners, though, is look, a lot of people, honestly, such as myself, when we will go to the polls. We will probably vote for Jill Stein, or we will not vote at the top of the ticket. But there is an entire down ballot that needs to be addressed. Yeah. And that is where we live. We live in the down ballot, in the state races, in Congress, in the Senate, and even city council races. It's important to go exercise your right to vote on those down ballot. And actually, let's get people in who actually represent us in the down ballot ticket. And so I really hope your listeners say, something. It's true. I really don't see there's personality differences between Trump and Biden, but at the end of the day, I don't see a difference in terms of policy. So I would just say, please still go vote. Just take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, because I'm almost going to ignore that top of the ticket, but I'm going to go vote. There's a whole ticket to vote with. What are your thoughts on that, Cameron? Do you agree?
And I try to stay away from it sometime, even publicly, but I've mentioned very much so that I too am in that very growing and soaring number of those who originally voted for the president and are having some struggles with who's on your mind when you're going this time. And it's a myriad of things, not just, of course, this particular Israeli piece. I'm not so, I don't want to get off topic so much, but I'm not so happy with the treatment of student loan debt by this administration, though much of it has been forgiven, I will say.
Well, but hold on. When you see these checks, these massive checks being cut for Ukraine, for Israel, for Taiwan, even when you find out what the strategic alliances are, how does that make you feel?
Certainly, as an American that is thousands of dollars in debt,
who went to school to give yourself options, but now
absolutely
you're in debt, so your options have been reduced.
Absolutely. And this is becoming very real. You all, as I mentioned, when we were talking about Dexter Reed some time ago, I'm also a 26-year-old Black man in America. So my life is starting now. I'm looking now at my credit score, and all of these different factors are playing into where I can economically reach now. My economic reach has been stifled by student loan debt. That is a very, very real reality. And I went to Central State University and I graduated with about $40,000 in debt. I found out that even in my position, I'm sort of lucky, because I have brothers that are coming out of Morehouse College, with $60,000 of debt per year. Talk about what they're going to have when they get out on the other side of their degree as well, and they begin to to look at what their economic reach is. How can you buy a car? How can you buy a house? How can you sustain yourself? How can you have the pursuit of the American dream? And as Ms. Jackson so eloquently put it, but then we have these big checks that are, and we're just chipping away every day a little bit here. We're gonna forgive for this borrower and for this borrower and for people who've had their loans in remission for decades and so on and so forth. We can cut student loan debt in this country, and we can give an entire generation of Americans, I'm not just talking about Black people, an entire generation of Americans a true economic an economic push, if you will, at this time in their lives. So again, yes, Josh, I am in that same boat of folks who are going to the polls a little leery. And again, but I appreciate what you mentioned, because I learned at the Rainbow Push Coalition that all the time you don't vote from the top down, you vote from the bottom up. And so your local elections are going to be the most important anyway. Your local politics is being local anyhow. I'm not going to tell anybody who to vote for at the top of the ticket. I'm going to tell you to vote. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but I will tell you, pay much more attention to your local ballots than in some of these different situations. The president of the United States may not ever walk down your street, but your alderman and state representative will.
Well said. Well put.
Well, I literally have a minute left for y'all. I'm gonna run over just a little bit, but if you could give me about 30 seconds, Josh.
It's
a lot.
Yeah. I want to end on a detail. You said, what are the students doing when they're having their list of demands? When one goes to the encampment, there's actually a full schedule every day. They actually have people there doing education on whether it's civil disobedience or actually learning about the history of things, or there was one actually on basically minority rights. They were constantly doing, quote, sessions out there. So they're using the time to figure out, how do we actually organize, educate, and empower? They are using that time wisely. So they're not just sitting out there. They've got they publish a schedule every day. Here's what's actually happening today in terms of our movement. So that I just want to end by answering the question. That's what the students are doing in the meantime while they're out there. So,
Well, or should I say, with their time?
yes.
They are working. They're not just sitting there.
Exactly. So rather than a summary, I'm giving a detail of what's going on.
But that I think, because what we're doing also is dispelling the myths here.
Yes.
They're not just sitting there, Dwight. 30 seconds for you.
Well, I just want to see how proud I am of these students. They really renewed my hope, my faith in humanity, because they're fighting, the great fight of their generation. And God is going to bless them and reward them, because ultimately this is God's work. A lot of this should be done by the churches, but who have kind of reneged on their responsibility. But I'm just excited to see these students being so involved and so dedicated.
Well, thank you for all the work you've done through the years, because heaven knows this is work that you've been at for about 60 years.
Wow.
Since you were a kid. Cameron Barnes, Minister Barnes, 30 seconds.
Yes, ma'am. I just want to highlight in these last 30 seconds what some of the asks are from these students. And that, as I've researched them, to condemn the targeted harassment of students and the disproportionate censorship of pro-Palestine speech, to affirm and protect student civil liberties, and to build a safe environment for intellectual and political expression. They also want, of course, that these universities disclose their investment, and that they divest from genocide and from Israel, that they cut ties with Israel, and that they protect student protesters. These are some of the things that students across the nation are rising up for. This is not just for play. This is not to get media coverage. These are real issues that are going on right now. And I think that America needs to turn a listening ear to the students that are not of tomorrow, but of today.
And be very clear, this energy is not going to end in November.
Absolutely not.
It's going to go on and on and on and on. Because Cameron, your generation, and I would say Joshua, ours, We are pushing for the world not to be better, but for it to be right.
That's right.
You know, all of us have gone down very different roads to get to even this meeting place right here. But the fact is, your road has been your road, your journey has been your journey, Joshua and Cameron. I respect it and love them all because guess what? Every hurt, every happiness, every twist and turn has gotten us here together, working together. And what a beautiful thing that is. It's a high road to heaven. Oh, it's a high road to heaven. And what a day of rejoicing will be when we all get there together, when we all see the glory of God together. And we will. We're not of different faiths. We're of different religions. We all have one faith.
Yes.
I mean, and if you're an agnostic or an atheist, I hear you. But those of us who are in the world of faith, that's where you are. You might be Jewish, you might be Buddhist, you might be Christian, you might be this. It is what it is. Whatever you do, and you might take a little bit of, you might do, what is it? You just might ad hoc it. Just say, okay, I'm gonna take a little bit of this, and that's kind of sort of what I do. And because some of those peaceful people I know are not self-professed Christians. I want to know, how did you get there? That's my point. Really. And so I think that, we have to understand this is a political fight. This is about divvying up resources, everybody. Let's be clear on that. This is about sharing the bounty of the world. God did not make a mouth that God couldn't feed. And God does not have a vision without making provision. And we're all visions of God manifested. So there's enough for all of us to be abundant, to live an abundant life in this world. Let's make that happen. Stop killing babies, women, children, and their daddies. In Palestine and in the Mississippi Delta and in Pakistan, wherever there is want or pain, end it now. That's it. I love you, everybody. Love you, Josh. Love you, dear Cameron, young man.
Love you, Miss Jackson.
Love you, precious. God bless you, everybody. What a joy.